Monster Train is the sort of game that's very easy to start playing, but incredibly difficult to master. Monster Train's the sort of game that's really easy to start playing, but can be difficult to master. And often when you make mistakes, those mistakes accumulate, resulting in a loss that feels random. It feels like it's out of your control because that's just RNG, right? When in fact, if you replayed either the battle or the entire round differently, you might get a different outcome. When I got my first win, I thought I was pretty good at Monster Train, until I started pushing Covenants. When I beat Covenant 10, I thought I was pretty good, until I tried daily challenges and the PvP and realized I wasn't nearly as good as I thought I was. And now I'm feeling like I'm pretty good again, so clearly this is just pride before the fall for the third time. However, on my journey, I've played quite a bit, and so I wanted to share a few of my experiences with you. That way, hopefully, you can avoid some of the mistakes that I made along the way. With that said, if you enjoy this kind of content, want to see more gaming news, thoughts on indie games, be sure to get subscribed, ring the bell so you don't miss future videos, and maybe leave a like while you're down there. But for now, let's get into my top 10 tips and tricks for Monster Train. Tip number 1. You pick a primary clan and a secondary clan. When doing this, it's very important to pick options which synergize with each other. For example, when you're picking the Shardtail Queen, you might want Melting Remnant to bring your imps back so you can explode them again. If you're using a champion with incant paths like Wilden or Spine Chief, consider the Stygian Guard for their great access to spells and incant units. From there, when choosing cards, artifacts, and upgrades, especially early on, pay close attention to the final boss. For example, Seraph of the Chaste punishes buff and debuff builds, so optimizing around that, maybe making a rage build, isn't necessarily the best. And to be clear, you don't always have to build around your champion. If your starting cards don't synergize at all with your champion, and you think that it's better for your champion to take a backseat to whatever strategy that you're setting out, that's also totally fine. But regardless of what it is, you need a plan going in. If you just take cards at random, you're going to end up with a pretty terrible deck that has no synergy and falls apart a couple bosses in. If you want to know more about picking a clan or a champion, be sure to check out my champion guide and tier list after this. And that brings me to tip number 2. When you're adding cards to your deck, upgrading your units, or choosing between the regular or exiled starting cards, always look for synergies. When something has sweep, giving it damage lets you clear entire floors. If a unit has high damage but low health, upgrade it with health or protect it with armor. And if it has high damage or slay, consider multi-strike so it can kill multiple units. Maybe trample if that's available as well. Similarly, when upgrading spells, if there's something you want to cast every turn, try to add holdover. But if you want to add a more potent effect, then try putting on spell power. Maybe you want a really potent effect and also want less cards in your deck. In that case, you could add spell power and consume. In general, it's better to have a few really strong cards than a lot of really weak ones, which means artifacts that allow you to upgrade your units or spells 3 times are also excellent options, though you won't be offered them in every run. Now, tip number 3, positioning and floor capacity matters. By default, floors have 5 capacity. Enemies always appear on the bottom floor and move up until they reach the pyre room. You can expand floor capacity to place more units there, or move your units to the floor to overstack it. But a floor can never exceed 7 units. Therefore, when you place units on the bottom floors, they immediately get to engage with foes. Higher risk, but higher reward. And this is especially effective with endless units, because you can place them on the bottom floor, then the middle floor, and finally the top floor. On the other hand, placing a unit on the top floor is a great way to keep it out of danger, but means it won't engage in combat until later, so if it has any sort of ramping slay or incant effect, this might not be as good. It's also important to remember that units are generally attacked front to back, and certain effects always target the front or backmost enemy, with sweep hitting the entire floor. Therefore, a good rule of thumb when placing units is tanky high health units or a unit with endless towards the front, squishy high damage units or those that provide buffs towards the back, because enemies will target your front line first. And if your frontmost unit doesn't have enough health or armor to survive, they may be killed before it even gets to attack, which is great if you just want to proc its extinguish effect. Tip 4. When playing cards during combat, don't play reflexively. Instead, slow down a bit and consider your options. As you place creatures on the field, the results will display what your actions are going to do, so you can see the impact you'll get out of casting a spell or placing a unit. And whenever there's multiple threats to think about, avoid overkilling units. Instead, look for that little X down at the bottom of their health bar. And if you're playing a card of a random component, it often pays to play them earlier in a turn, so you could base more consistent actions on the results of random ones. But what might you do with all that extra damage because you've killed everything on the floor and don't need to stack more power there? Dump it into the boss. Most bosses are pretty easy to attack even before they become relentless in their final round, and if you chip away at their health, that final round will be far easier. Now tip number 5, when choosing upgrades, try to cover for a unit or spell's weaknesses. If a spell has a high cost, consider reducing it. If a unit has lots of damage but no life, give them health. Some special upgrades like Unit Essences, Multi-Strike, Quick, Endless, Holdover, or Permafreeze are also incredibly powerful, but much more expensive, and therefore should only be used on your best units and spells. After you have an amazing card, look for the red Hell Vents where you can duplicate them, because if one is good, then 2 has to be better. Tip number 6, certain spells have Piercing. This makes them incredibly potent, as Piercing negates enemy defenses. Things like Armor, Damage Shield, and Spell Shield. These spells are not only great at taking out enemy tanks, many of which have relatively low health but massive armor, they're also good at hitting problematic foes who hide behind Spell Shield and damage immunity. Hornbreak from the Hellhorn faction is a good example of this, but there are several other ways to integrate Piercing into your deck. Personally, I always try to have at least one Piercing effect whenever possible because it's very good at taking out problematic enemies. Tip number 7, when it comes to deck size, bigger is not better. Be liberal with removing cards from your deck via Vortex and the shop, because when you run a smaller deck, you're better able to draw what you want. Train Stewards are a good example of this. They're a starting card, and if you don't get a Prototype Mark II artifact, they end up being too weak to even really be cannon fodder in later rings. You have the highest possible chance to draw your best spells and units, and you want to play all of your units out on the field so that they're not clogging up your deck. Therefore, don't be afraid to skip card options when they're offered. Much like how it's important to duplicate your best cards, it's equally if not more important to remove your worst. Another couple ways to do this are adding Consume. This is a great way to slim down your deck temporarily. Much like a unit, when a Consume card is played, it effectively goes to exile. Thus, it's not clogging up your deck and you're not drawing it multiple times. Your deck will have more cards initially, but it'll slim down over the course of a battle. And a lot of cards with Consume effects are stronger than cards without them. Purge also is a great way to remove cards permanently, since once you play it, it's gone forever, and can be used to slim out your deck. Tip number 8, when you're doing well, it can pay to save gold for the shops at the end. On later rings, you're offered access to an artifact shop, and artifacts can often be deck defining. When you're struggling, don't be afraid to spend gold early to purge cards, upgrade units, spells, and more, but it pays to keep some extra gold on hand to spend right before you end your run. Tip number 9, your eyes can be bigger than your stomach. It can be very rewarding to participate in trials, or make pacts and obtain shards. However, this can also quickly snowball a fight out of control, leading to a loss. If you're crushing everything, you should absolutely take trials, especially early on, but be wary about taking them later. Even something as simple as adding thorns or armor can easily turn a win into a crushing defeat. Similarly, pact shards are mandatory if you want to beat the Last Divinity, and pact bonuses offer unique and powerful effects, like giving a spell piercing or adding a unit's essence to another, infusing them with unique powers. But they also make boss fights significantly more difficult, and can again turn an easy win into a fatal loss. So engage with caution, and if you find yourself losing several times in a row, maybe step back, take less pacts, and don't do many trials. Go with something consistent and kind of get back into your groove. Tip number 10, if you're in a tough encounter and you make a mistake, or you simply want to try a different tactic, you can restart the battle by exiting to your menu. This is a lot like save scumming, and does have a somewhat mixed stance in the community. However, I'm pretty sure if developers really didn't want players doing this, they would have patched it ages ago, maybe by making actions save every turn. If you do it too much, it might feel scummy, and you may ruin the game for yourself. So if you don't feel like this is a legitimate way to win, by all means avoid it. But if you see the battle as a puzzle, and want to try fitting different pieces together, or simply learning from your mistakes, this is a great way to do that. For me personally, it was a great learning tool that helped me improve my run significantly. The battle uses a fixed seed, meaning you'll draw the same starting hand, spawn the same enemies, and draw cards in the same order. However, your actions, such as choosing to discard a card or not, can change later outcomes. Whether you place a unit on floor 1 or 3 might matter, and if you play a consume card early, removing it from your deck, you might draw a different hand later as a result. Card variables that say random also roll randomly, leading to different results from run to run. Personally, I benefited from this a lot, especially when it came to learning the game, and I think getting to restart, learn from your mistakes, fix positioning, and explore alternative lines of play is one of the fundamentals of card games. Yes, you can just start another run, but that run might not make you any better at playing this deck archetype, whereas if you learn now, you can take that into future games. And so those are my 10 tips, focused around getting wins, progressing your Covenant, and just getting into the game as a newer player. But what are yours? Is there anything that you've been struggling with where you finally had an epiphany and got over that hurdle? Or are you an expert who crushes Covenant 25 and wants to give some tips to newer players? If you want to know more about what clan or champion to pick, then do be sure to check out my clan and champion guide. Or if you want to know my thoughts on the game, then check out my review. On the other hand, if you've gotten here and you've said, maybe I want something else as well, consider my recent video on 3 hot indie games that are blowing up and putting AAA to shame. Or if you want something like Monster Train, check out my reviews for Slave Aspire and Loop Hero. Those will all be up in the card and down in the description below. Before I go, a special thanks to my patrons and channel members for their continued support, because I really wouldn't be able to make videos like this without community support. Thank you, and if you want to support for yourself, links down below. Now, with that said, congratulations, you've made it to the end of a video. I hope you learned something, good luck in your runs, and I hope to see you again sometime soon.